Well, we did it. We started the 2023-24 college basketball season all the way back in November. There were games with sparkling lights in Las Vegas, and then we got all the way to Cleveland, Ohio, home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. After thousands of games, thousands of whistles, thousands of made buckets, we have a new national champion. Come on down, South Carolina. We are talking all about it today, right here on Locked On Women's Basketball.
Ogunbowale for the win. Good!
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Happy Monday, friends. It is April 8th, 2024. The road to the Final Four was bumpy at times. It was smooth at times and downright challenging, but we made it. And tonight, the other national champion in college basketball will be crowned in Phoenix. But just remember, there is only one undefeated team out there, and they have their national champion crowns. Hi, everybody. I am Missy Heidrick, national women's basketball correspondent at The Next. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Well, as we hoped it would be, and many billed it as such, the 2024 NCAA tournament did not disappoint. And yet again, it was a fantastic display of women's college basketball. The game continues to grow to new heights with massive numbers of eyeballs watching on every known device and butts in the seats. The Final Four was a culmination of what was yet another fantastic year in the women's game. NC State, UConn, Iowa, and South Carolina gave us great storylines to talk about, but most importantly, outstanding action on the floor. And now we have a new national champ and the only undefeated team in college basketball, period. And that is South Carolina. Here to break it all down with me today is the sports editor at SF Gate and an AP women's basketball voter, Alex Simon. Good morning, Alex. Bright and early out in your neck of the woods. And actually here, and I should say happy Eclipse Day to everybody, no matter where you are. I hope you have your glasses and you can catch a glimpse of the eclipse. But I think what we have seen over this past weekend and at the Final Four for the 2024 women's college basketball season was a glimpse and a true shining spotlight on women's basketball. Give me your thoughts right off the take of what you thought of this weekend as a whole, what we saw both on Friday and then what it led up to with the championship game yesterday.
Yeah, Missy, not even the moon could stop how much women's basketball was shining from this weekend because, oh my goodness, we had, I think, really what I thought was an incredible Friday night too. And in fact, it was funny to watch Friday night. It looks like it wasn't as close as we knew it was at halftime in the first game between South Carolina and NC State. But UConn, Iowa had a substantial amount of build up to it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's two massive names in players in terms of Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckford's programs with various levels of history and kind of a weird inverse of where, historically they have been, where UConn almost feels like an upstart right now relative to Iowa. And the game delivered and then some. Obviously, the viewership numbers came in. And then Sunday delivers and then some. What just incredible basketball. And, within that, it was hard to imagine. Really, you can look at this even going back to Monday with the Elite Eight games between Iowa, LSU, UConn, USC. It was hard to imagine there being more hype than there was for the last 5 games of college women's basketball at the top level, between those 2 Elite Eight games, the 2 Final Four games, and then the national title game.
Yeah.
All 5 more than lived up to their height and exceeded the hype that they had and delivered some of the most incredible hoops we've seen anywhere on the planet this year.
Well, and I think it was interesting. You mentioned all of those games, and we can all take out a single individual because that's one of the storylines I think that has captivated people so much here in March, but I think early or throughout the course of the season, we knew way back in November that there were going to be stars within the women's game this season. But yet on the flip side, I look at those Elite Eight games at the beginning of last week up into the Final Four. And I think what you saw was also very complete teams on display.
Yeah.
And that sometimes has gotten, I think, maybe lost a little bit in the weeds sometimes. And for those of us that watch the game, see it all the time, that we live and breathe that, you tend to gravitate maybe to more of the unsung hero, so to speak, on a stat sheet, or somebody that comes through with a big play that not everybody noticed. But that's what you have to do. Basketball is a team game, and that has been on display here in spades throughout the course of this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, look, I cover a team locally here in the Bay Area in Stanford that ended up with literally the top power forward and center in the country, according to the Hall of Fame's awards.
Yeah.
And they got bounced in the Sweet 16 because they didn't really have great guard play this year.
Yeah.
And that came back to hurt them several times throughout the season, but especially in their Sweet 16 loss to NC State. But yeah, like Juju Watkins, literally her first moment on the court as a freshman in Las Vegas, like you mentioned, announced, hey, I'm a superstar now. It's like night one, I'm a superstar. And I happened to be in the building when she dropped 51 this year and was like, oh yeah, no, she's absolutely a superstar. And she proved that time and time again this year with a really complete roster at USC that might have been skewed a little too star heavy relative to when they hit the Elite Eight and played a UConn team that has a similar star in Paige Beckers, but that team was way more balanced across the board in that regard. Sometimes a star can be so good, hello, Caitlin Clark, that you can overcome everything in every way, shape, and form. And other times you get to the national title game and South Carolina has, technically nobody that we would look at as a star. I'll put finger quotes in for the audio podcast that this is for those watching on YouTube and whatnot. But South Carolina has like 8 players who could be that type of star had they not gone to the program where they all play together. And that team, honest to goodness, might be the most complete team I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
All across the board.
Yeah, I think the balance is absolutely right. Okay, I want to take a step back and just talk a little bit more about Friday, because I think what we saw early in the first game, when you thought about NC State, who had made a run, knocked off some really good teams. I mean, you look at this, for those that are listening to us, I'm holding up my magic bracket that is like all scribbles and knots. And, no bracket looked good even after the first day of play. But you think about where NC State came out of and who they had to knock off to get there. They weren't a 1 seed. And so they had to battle their way through that. I thought they had a great first half. And then you saw the machine that was South Carolina. They put the brakes on them. They swallowed them up. And they just didn't have the firepower to be able to go at South Carolina.
I happened to be watching that game with my family, and I turned to my brother at halftime when NC State was down 1, and I said, this might be the worst thing that happened to the Wolfpack, because Dawn Staley has, at this point, time and time again, proven that there is nobody in the country better at halftime adjustments than her.
Right.
And whether it's what she says to the team just in terms of their attitude or their mindset, or watching the game for a half and deciding this is what we need to win. South Carolina has, I can't even tell you how many times they've come out of a game where they've looked sluggish at half, and then the third quarter comes, and they remind me a lot of a NBA team that I used to see out here in the Bay Area, where the third quarter comes and they just say, all right, this game's over. We will take it in the third quarter, and it's over at that point. And I think it was like 29-6 or 27-6, but they won the third quarter by 20 points. And all of a sudden you went from, is this going to be a close game throughout, to nope, this is over.
Yeah. And it didn't take long, and you're absolutely right, those adjustments. And I thought that they turned the defensive intensity up to 3 or 4 levels, and NC State didn't have an answer. And every shot they took was contested. They never got the good looks that they had in the first half. And that's just hard to come, and it starts to snowball, and you make misses, and then it's runouts and live ball turnovers, and it just goes one thing after another. And that was a decisive win in the semifinals by South Carolina. Then the second game, it was the matchup everybody was looking for and wanting, and it was the Paige Beckers versus Caitlin Clark. But as we said, 2 very, very good teams in UConn versus Iowa. As you looked at that game, you looked at that matchup, it seemed to me and felt to me that there were other players that I think ultimately were the reason why Iowa comes out on top in that game.
Yeah, I mean, the last quarter, you saw Kate Martin
Yeah.
take Paige Beckers on directly multiple times off the dribble. And I mean, I saw one person, and it's hard not to see this. One person was like, Kate Martin got her Dirk Nowitzki on with the way that she would drive in and then just hit a little leaning floater the way that Dirk used to do it all the time. And she did 3 or 4 times in the quarter against UConn's best. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need your players to step up to win that are not just who everyone expects. And she absolutely did that for them all season. But when they needed it the most, Kate Martin was the one who stepped up there. And yeah, for Iowa all throughout this season, it has not just been the Caitlin show, no matter how many people would love for it to just be the Caitlin show. Yeah. You don't get to, I mean, we can talk about them bigger picture too, but that team was good enough to be where they got to this year, without a doubt.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. And I think they proved it, and their unselfishness, the way that they worked together and that they battled on every possession. You knew you were going to get that kind of effort. They did that, and it got them into the national championship, which is what Alex and I are going to talk about next. We not only have to talk about the matchup that it was, but the true magnitude of what it takes to go undefeated and win a national title. And I'm going to ask him this question in a minute. Do we think South Carolina's dominance is getting enough love? We'll talk about it on the flip side. But first, a message from our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You can get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. The NBA playoffs begin shortly. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Prize Picks has something for every fan, from basketball and hockey to League of Legends and everything in between. You can pick LeBron, you could have picked Caitlin Clark, Connor McDavid, Jude Bellingham, all in the same entry. So Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions and special offers for the biggest moments in sports. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Download the app today and use that code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Hi, everybody. Missy Heidrick, and welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. My question to you is this: are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have you turned down the volume with all that shouting? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Alex Simon is here. He is the sports editor at SF Gate. Why I get that backwards every time, I have no idea. He is out on the West Coast bright and early today on Monday, March 8th, the day after we have crowned a brand new national champion. All right, let's dive a little bit into this game, Alex. We had the Iowa-South Carolina matchup. It was the one, I think, after we got past the Paige Beckers, Caitlin Clark matchup, this was going to be the one that I think everybody thought we could get to that would be the most entertaining along the way. It was the one I picked. I hadn't picked a game all season. I hate to do that. I don't like to, but I had picked this. I'd said South Carolina and Iowa would meet in the national championship, and I said South Carolina would win. My reasoning behind it was this: I didn't think that Iowa necessarily had the depth to be able to go at South Carolina. I felt like there was just too much athleticism out front that they would swallow up, that there would be some adjustments in how they wanted to guard Caitlin Clark. And ultimately, the size inside was just something that Iowa didn't have an answer to. As you looked at this game, what stood out to you?
I mean, that was true. I will give Iowa credit. I think you look at the fact that you get to the under 5 media timeout, so there's like 4.5 minutes left. Iowa was down 6. And At one point, I think it even got down to as low as either 5 or 4 towards the end of the stretch there. To some extent, because of the mismatch in every way, shape, and form, we saw all throughout the court. South Carolina is just so much more athletic than them. We saw Raven Johnson's length for as much as she struggled offensively. Her wingspan, which is significantly longer than her actual height. I remember M. Adler, one of our draft experts there, said that I think she has 5 or 6 inches more in her wingspan than she does in her height. We saw that make a massive impact with multiple poke-out steals that lead to uncontested fast break layups. Everything about this game said, all right, South Carolina is probably running away with this, but you get to 4 minutes to go, and all it took was probably 2 Caitlin 3-pointers to get launched and go down, and it's a tie game. So at that point, though, yeah, it was obvious, I think, that, look, this South Carolina team's been maybe one of the best and most complete teams ever. They lost this matchup last year really with one fault, and it was that Iowa dared them to rein in 3-pointers and denied them doing anything else, and they went 4 for 20 from 3. And as I pull up the stats here from yesterday, I do know this. It was, I think, in the first half that they had matched their 3-point output from last season. And yeah, when we look at the box score from yesterday, the Gamecocks end up 8 of 19. So they double their 3-pointers made in basically the same number. Mm-hmm. And really, you look at the final score, they win by 12, and they had 4 more 3-pointers for 12 more points. Not to say that it came down to just that, but that's kind of a big deal.
Oh, no, 100%. And I think it really changed the makeup of the matchup, because that's not what that wasn't part of what South Carolina had. You mentioned it earlier, Dawn Staley being able to make the adjustments in game and what she can do at halftime or out of a huddle. But I think this was also sort of a full service season to season adjustment, and knowing that they had to have more of a perimeter threat, that they know they can take people off the dribble, they can get to the rim. They've got size. They've got one of the best post players in the middle in Camila Cardoso, but I got to be able to open the floor. And they did that with players like Bree Hall and Raven Johnson adding it to her game. And a kid that has stood out to me, coming from actually my home state where I was born and raised in Minnesota, someone who's made a name for herself over the course of the last week, off the bench, Tessa Johnson. She goes 3 of 6 from 3. Those are game changers right there. And someone who stepped on the floor in that big and of a spotlight with huge confidence couldn't have asked for a better day.
Tessa Johnson kind of played Bree Hall off the floor because she was too good to take her off during the second half of that game. But on top of that, I mean, they also, by the way, the Gamecocks blend a very nice use of the transfer portal into this program. Mm-hmm. Tahina Pau, 3 of 4 from 3-pointer, 4 of 7 overall, 3 of 4 from the line, plus just the calm nature that she can bring. So I look at everything about this team, and it was I'm going to give you a hot take that nobody else knows about because there's no way to know. I actually submitted my AP poll Friday night and was not going to change it no matter what happened yesterday. South Carolina was my number 1 team in the country. One single loss, had they lost to Iowa, unless it was such a blowout, maybe I would have considered it. But even if they had lost, they were my number 1 team in the country this year, and it really wasn't close in my mind. Nothing about the game. Obviously, they win, but even if it was a close loss, I still would have kept them number 1 because it's just the obvious choice to me. And I look at the way that the season played out, and I believe it was Lindsay Gottlieb who told people this in Cleveland. I forget who I saw post this on social media, but this is kind of Caitlin Clark's world right now. But this was absolutely South Carolina's season.
Yes.
And there's just nothing that could happen. I will say, Missy, and maybe we can talk about this going into other segments, I don't know what season's not going to be South Carolina's going forward.
That is, I would say, a very great question, and a couple other statistics to bring to kind of give everybody a little bit of taste, I think, of the balance of this South Carolina team that came out of that box score from yesterday. Chloe Kitts, 11 points, 10 rebounds, 15 points, 17 boards by the most outstanding player of the Final Four, Camila Cardoso. You get the 19 points from Tessa Johnson off the bench. They outscored Iowa, their bench, 37-0. They dominated them on the glass with their size and athleticism, 51-29. Those are numbers that flip a stat sheet. No matter how well you shoot, no matter how much you can try to defend, if you can't get some of those advantages to your side of the house, it's a very uphill battle. Which brings me to this question to you before we go to our next break. Is South Carolina getting enough tip of the hat, and are they getting enough love, as I said earlier, for this dominance and going undefeated this season?
I think there's certainly less about them in a national narrative sense during the season, in part because of the star power all throughout college basketball. And
Mhm.
there's no question to me that it could be more. When you complete the undefeated season in this regard, it is going to be a coronating summer like no other for them.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, what do you think people are going to talk about next month when South Carolina and Columbia specifically hosts a preseason game from the Aces playing Puerto Rico? Like,
Right.
we all know what the conversation is going to be there, and they will absolutely get the flowers I think they deserve. Plus, you know what's going to help get the flowers, I think, is when you're the national title favorite for next year and probably the next several years.
Yes. No, I think you're absolutely right. Okay. When we come back, Alex and I, we're going to take a quick look back at a little bit about all of things around this 23-24 college basketball season, maybe what we learned and what we are looking forward to. Well, when you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has vast network of more than 1 billion professionals who make it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that and will make the process easy and intuitive for you. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Those are pretty darn good numbers. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats these days and might not have the time or resources to hire. They're constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Hi, everybody. Missy Heidrick. Welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. I am joined by Alex Simon. Also, before we talk a little bit about what the season has been before, I want to encourage everybody, if you have not been, get over to thenexthoops.com, where it has been amazing coverage throughout this entire Final Four and what comes ahead in the world of women's basketball. That is the WNBA, the draft, international. It is all there, and we have you covered. All right, Alex, we've talked a little bit, I think, in general about what the season has been, and it was star power, people jumping onto the spotlight and onto the worldwide scene of women's basketball all the way back in November. We saw a bunch of teams go undefeated up to a certain point. We're left with only one in all of college basketball in general, and that is South Carolina. But as you look back on this 23-24 season, are there certain things that have stood out to you that maybe are something that we should all be, having our antenna up a little bit and or really look forward to for the 24-25 season?
Yeah, I mean, for one, the transfer portal is only going to become more impactful to the top level going forward. We
Yeah.
mentioned Tina Pau. She was a difference maker for this South Carolina team this year at various points of the season. I think they could have made a tournament run without her, but I don't know if they finish this season undefeated and look as good as they do without her. And she proved exactly why some players will continue to enter the portal. We know that there are probably thousands at this point of players in the portal seeking new homes. And particularly with the shakeup coming to the conference structure, I think we are going to see all sorts of new and interesting and wild situations from the portal. And I don't necessarily think that it's going to be a bad thing for every roster, but I certainly can't imagine that teams like South Carolina haven't become more desirable to those transfers. If they have a spot or two open and they want to hit the portal, if I'm a player in the portal, they're my number one choice no matter what at this point. So we'll certainly see that. I also think though that there is plenty of star power with Caitlin Clark leaving in this game. We're seeing quite a few players who were big name players going to the WNBA this year in Clark, in Cameron Brink, Angel Reese. And yet, look at all of these juniors and COVID year players like Becker's coming back.
Mhm.
Look at these sophomores who are here. Look at the freshmen. Like
Yes.
there are some freshmen that are playing. I got to see Audie Crooks drop 40 in an NCAA tournament game. We've seen Full Wiley do some incredible things for South Carolina. Juju, Hannah Hidalgo. Oh yeah, by the way, Olivia Miles still going to come back. Still could be really impactful for Notre Dame. Like they're going to be scared. Like everything about this is like, all right, the college game is in good hands. It will be fine without Caitlin Clark. They might even get crazy ratings numbers in the future because of how star-powered this sport still is. I'm just really excited and going to be a fascinating few weeks here, but I'm excited about where college basketball will continue to go from here.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things as we think about conference realignment, we've talked about it so much, but now it's all actually coming to a head. You think about Texas joining the SEC and a player like Madison Booker, who was the co-Big 12 player of the year in that league, and as well as freshman of the year. She's just going to be a sophomore. And now you've got Texas headed into the SEC where they're going to go up against the likes of South Carolina and LSU and a new look Tennessee squad, and all of that changes. I would be interested, though, for someone who has covered Stanford, and you see this way more than those of us that are probably in the Midwest and the folks on the East Coast, as teams like Stanford and Cal, and they make these changes. We see USC, UCLA go to the Big Ten. Stanford's go into the ACC. Cameron Brink came out and said that that was not something she was overly excited about. Therefore, do you think that changes the landscape or just how these teams are going to be seen or viewed specifically to women's basketball?
I think there's undoubtedly going to be an impact. The degree to which is going to be difficult. Stanford might have it way harder than they've ever had it before, both because of what people know that they have to sign up for with this new conference. And also, as we look at the way that NIL can impact things, are you going to be able to keep up financially at a school like Stanford where it's not necessarily the highest athletically oriented institution in the world? They also, have made it public that they would certainly welcome some transfers. Tara Vanderveer apparently told the new men's basketball coach there that they are working hard to get the transfer situation shook up at Stanford. And I'm very fascinated to see what will happen with them in the portal, with NIL. All across the Pac-12, though, I think what you're going to see is just all of these schools go off to different places and kind of reckon with the new world that they didn't have any control over bringing. But you got to make the best of it. I think a couple programs, particularly USC and UCLA, look like they'll be in good shape. I actually think Colorado is going to look really solid in this new Big 12 that they're going back to in that regard, and they should be set up even with some players leaving like Jalen Sherrod. But we're going to find out a lot, and Stanford's maybe the barometer for a lot of folks because of how good they've been historically out west. But can you keep it up going into a pretty competitive ACC conference in that regard? But also it's going to make an impact for the school still there. Like the Next had a piece out from Talia Goodman kind of looking at Iowa's future, and they will be losing a lot of players, obviously, from this core that has taken them to the national title game back-to-back years. You might think that they would dip maybe a little bit, but they still got a lot of talent. They weren't going to dip. But then you're throwing in USC and UCLA. So all of a sudden, like, you're adding two teams who are probably going to be more talented than you next year. So you might have thought maybe you fall to fourth or fifth, but now with these new teams, sixth is still technically the top third of the league in the Big Ten, but it's still six. There's still 5 teams ahead of you. So there's a lot of people that are just going to have to reorient their thinking as to what means we're a really good team and what means we're not.
No, I that makes total sense. Actually, I had that conversation with someone yesterday. I said, here's look at a team like Iowa, and can Lisa Bluter take all of this success over the last couple years and parlay it into recruiting? Possibly there's some transfers that want to come there. But then you got to think, oh, wait, my life in the Big Ten isn't as simple as it maybe was this past year or the last couple years, because you've got a young, loaded team coming from USC and who's coming from UCLA. Now I got to deal with Lauren Betts every night inside when I play UCLA. That hasn't happened on a regular basis in the Big Ten. My question also to you, as we wrap this up and we think about this year and into the next and what happens, There has been conversation. There was an announcement by Charlie Baker, president of the NCAA, talking about performance units when it comes to the upcoming women's NCAA tournament. It's never been tied to everybody out there. They have it in the men's. Wins gets you money. Ultimately, that's how it parlays into your leagues. If this and when this happens for the women's tournament, some would probably say, oh, maybe a little late. If I was a Big Ten person, being like, wouldn't it have been great if I could have had it now? Yeah, would have been great if this would have been on the table the last 2 years. But is this, and how do you think these new teams, as they make their new way into new leagues all over the country, I feel like this is going to shake it up even more.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly what you've seen, really. And you can honestly go back to Gino and UConn with this when they won 4 straight titles.
Yeah,
Gino has said time and time again, this is the standard we have at UConn. It's not up to y'all to have us fall back to you. You've got to catch up to us. Mm-hmm. And you can look, obviously, I think South Carolina is built to be that level of a program. I think they could win multiple national titles in a row. They've already been to 4 straight Final Fours. I don't see any reason why it won't be 5, 6, 7, right? But the standard is now higher than ever. But now there is even more incentive to be investing pretty heavily in women's basketball when you get to this tournament, which, oh, by the way, is bringing in, starting next year, $60 million a year, not 6 or whatever it was. And honestly, the NCAA is underselling it again. That's a different conversation and a different podcast for later.
Got it.
When it's that much money, yeah, you can earn that back pretty nicely. And I think we're going to see a lot of schools that otherwise spend big in football, in men's basketball, realize that women's basketball is worth just as much of an investment on the level of those, because it can give you that money back.
No, you can get your return and then some, and we have seen it. We've seen the eyeballs watching on every kind of device humanly possible, and we have seen the butts in the seats, and it has proven itself yet again. I think the 23-24 season set it up, and 24-25 can be even better. Alex Simon, where does everyone find you, my friend?
You can go on social media platforms at Alex Simon Sports and read whatever we're doing on the sports section at sfgate.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to all of you for listening and watching today. You can follow me at Missy Heidrick on X, formerly known as Twitter, whatever it is. Make sure to get over, see all of my amazing colleagues and their fantastic coverage at thenexthoops.com. And follow this podcast at Locked On WBB. While the college basketball season has officially now ended, our coverage does not. The portal is still insane. There's coaching changes happening, and there are things you need to know. So you got to come see us at the next. And then it's all about the WNBA coverage coming up as well. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV for the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Congrats to the 2024 national champions, the South Carolina Gamecocks. I surely hope Darius Rucker is planning yet another sold-out concert for all of the students out there. I know they jumped in the fountain in Columbia, South Carolina. I hope you get Hootie and the Blowfish back there soon, because that absolutely would be the best celebration. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the men's championship tonight. It's UConn and Purdue. It is the matchup everybody wanted. Have a wonderful Monday.